Hi, and welcome to My John 17 for Life. This is a Christian podcast about finding your calling, understanding God's will, and learning how to live a life of purpose through faith and obedience. John 17:4 says, I have brought you glory on earth by finishing the work you gave me to do. And that's the heart behind what we do here. Because so many of us are asking, what is my purpose? What is God calling me to do? And how do I know if I'm living in God's will? And sometimes we don't need more pressure, we need clarity. In this podcast, I sit down with real people from all walks of life, moms, business owners, pastors, creatives, and everyday believers who are learning how to follow God, hear His voice, and walk in the purpose He has for their lives. If you've ever felt unsure about your direction, overwhelmed by life, or disconnected from your purpose, you're in the right place. Hi, Lesley. Thank you for coming on today and sharing your story. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey with God.
Well, I'm a retired educator after 25 years. I took retirement early to care for my husband. My journey with God began when I was 6 years old. I was raised in the church. I became a Christian at age 6. So God was an integral part of my life, growing up in the church, believing in Him, loving in Him as a child. But there's a difference between knowing God and doing all the things as you're growing up in church.
Mm-hmm.
I had an ideal childhood. Tragedy was the passing of my grandparents' natural causes. And so when something very traumatic hit, and I really had to dig down deep and called on Him, that's when it became real. Going through heartbreak, rejection, caregiving, it became real that, okay, God, I'm glad I have you in my life, but why are these things now happening?
Yes.
Faith is not something you just talk about and learn about on Sundays. It's got to be something that you have with you at all times. And I didn't necessarily have that.
As someone who grew up in the church as well, I think that's kind of a disadvantage that we have because there's not a big shift in our
No.
lives because I was the good kid, didn't do all the things, all the big sins. I didn't do
Yes.
anything.
Yes.
And
I totally
it's
understand that. I call it now, looking back, I call it being a surface Christian. I was on the surface doing all the things, praying and just doing what was expected of a
right.
Christian. And that was on the surface level.
I was told if you marry a Christian, your marriage will be easy. Was talking to my oldest daughter about this, and I said, I feel like the older brother of the prodigal son. I'm like, God, I've done everything I've been told to do. I've showed up exactly how I'm supposed to show up. Why did all of this happen? Why is it still happening? What is going on here? And my oldest daughter said, you may not have done the big things that everybody sees, but it's all the little things that are inside of you that he's chipping away at. And those are harder.
Absolutely.
Because we talk about, when you grow up in the church, you hear about all the things, don't dress provocatively, don't drink, don't smoke, don't do drugs, all of those things. That was easy. But those were never, ever a temptation for me. But nobody talked about, when they talked about gluttony, it was like, don't overeat, but it wasn't like, don't eat food that's bad for you. Don't overindulge in caffeine. The little things, a bitterness, none of it was talked about.
Yeah.
And it brings us to a very difficult place.
Yes, it does. Very much so.
That brings you to a season to where I call it the come to Jesus moment, where God's like, wake up. What
Right.
did He teach you in that moment that made you who you are today?
Well, it happened with a very emotional, painful, personal rejection by my granddaughter. And it shattered me emotionally in ways that I was not prepared for. And the assumption by that Christians automatically can handle the pain because they have God. And the thing is that because of the situation, I became angry. I became hurt, and it consumed me for a very long time. And I can pinpoint it was 7.5 years. And that 7.5 years was filled with all that hate, all that anger, all that bitterness. But it forced me to take a look at that surface level Christian. It forced me to change the direction of my life and eventually writing a book about the situation.
Yeah.
And not really knowing what the purpose was during those 7.5 years, but knowing that something had to change.
In that anger and bitterness, there is not only anger toward that person, but there's also anger that goes toward yourself of, I should have handled it better. I should have said this. I shouldn't have said that. I should have done. And it beats you up.
It beats you up, yes.
And that
And
Satan uses that more than he uses the anger toward the other person.
yes, because it was actually, she was in my life and my son's life. He had this child out of wedlock, and he and the mom split up when the baby was about 8 or 9 months old. He joined the Navy. He wanted to be able to provide and do what he was supposed to with his child support. So she was in our life until right before her 14th birthday. So it wasn't like we didn't have a relationship.
Right.
We definitely did, but we can't say what else was at play in her being raised by the other family.
Right.
And it was Satan putting those doubts in my mind. Where did I go wrong? What did I do? Not just blaming the other family. Did I miss something? I thought my son was a great dad and they did lots of things. And that is when you start projecting that anger not only outward, but then inward.
Yeah.
That's where you begin to change.
You're pouring the toxins into your own soil.
Absolutely.
What do you believe that God has called you to in this season?
Well, here's the thing. When I was 12 years old, not knowing what the future was, I gave my life to Christ as a servant. Does that mean I was going to go on the mission field? What did that look like to a 12-year-old? I had no idea. And so growing up, getting married, having kids, then going to college, I was like, okay, God, what's my purpose? What's going on? Because I can remember that 12-year-old and I haven't felt any type of calling. And so when I became a teacher, I felt like, okay, this is my mission field. This is what God has for me. And I can't blatantly teach the word of God in public school, but I can show my students, the parents, the type of person I am and how I treat my students.
Right.
Well, now I know the purpose that God was preparing me for. And that was for what Satan meant as evil in my life. God turned it into my purpose. And so now, a Christian women's speaker, I help women who are dealing with difficult things in their life, not necessarily rejection, but especially the Christian woman who had that surface level and now they're blaming themselves. It's them, what they did. And that's not necessarily correct because for 7.5 years, I listened to the father of lies, which Satan can really dig down deep and he can mess you up if you're not equipped to handle that.
Every calling costs something. And I've even had people say, my calling didn't cost me anything. And I'm like, look a little deeper because I've heard things like pride, I've heard money, I've heard time, I've heard family. When people get down to it, there is something that your calling is costing you. What is it costing you?
it's costing me comfort because writing my book was not comfortable. Revisiting everything that happened was not comfortable. And being a former teacher,
Right.
my audience was third and fifth graders. My audience wasn't adults.
Mm-hmm.
And when you dig down deep and you are willing to be vulnerable with your story,
Mm-hmm.
you open yourself up to criticism.
Yes.
You open yourself up to continuing to talk about that story.
Right.
But even within the discomfort, I find that in sharing, and even if I have one person come up to me, whether they read my book or they've heard me talk, if I have one person that tells me how it changed how they look at themselves or how they look at the situation or the person that has hit their heart, then it's worth me being uncomfortable because I am following what God prepared me for.
And the thing is about comfort is that if we're comfortable doing it, then it's about us and not God.
Absolutely.
I have a mentor that says you just need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yes. And that's what I tell ladies when they aren't sure about that first step to take towards healing. I say, you have to just be willing to be willing.
What do you believe that God has called you to in this season?
Well, my husband passed away a little over a year ago after I was his caregiver for 3 years. And I did kind of put a hold on my ministry. I was still working on my book, but I wanted to take the past year to grieve and go through all those first. And so what I did for the year 2026, my word is forward. And
Okay.
so I believe God has put in front of me my ministry to reach out to be uncomfortable on podcasts and getting up on stages to share my story and even being one on one with someone. Uh, the transformation that I went through completely changed my life. And so I feel like now the Lord's just put this ministry on me to step out in His purpose and what He has for me in the future, ministering and sharing to others. And that makes the 7.5 years of anger that I went through, knowing that He was preparing me for this, is amazing, uncomfortably amazing.
It makes it easier to know that it's doing something.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because there are things in our lives that it doesn't make sense. But when God gives you that gift of this is what it was for, it's huge.
Yes.
The podcast is about that verse, John 17:4, where Jesus is praying before he was crucified. And he says, I've glorified you here on earth. I've completed the work you've given me to do. What does it mean to you to finish the work God has given you to do?
Let me say that my mom became really good friends with a lady who was a missionary in China. If you know anything about Lottie Moon, who was over in China, Miss Daniel went to China not long after Miss Moon came back.
Okay.
And so I look at Miss Daniel, who passed away at 106 and who was still ministering to people in her nursing home up until almost the day she died. So finish the work God has given you. If I continue to walk in that path, I will not finish the work until He calls me home to heaven. But it means to be faithful with what God puts in front of me, whether it's big or small. And to finish the work, it's like my mentor tells me, her ministry and my ministry, I'm not doing it for my reward and for my glory. It's all done for God.
Right.
And even when he tells me to do something, sometimes I do feel unqualified, but I know that he's wanting me to finish
Mm,
the work that he has placed in front of me. And right now, it's to be honest, since I started this, it is incredible the people that God has put in front of me.
yes.
And you need to walk through your life with your eyes and your ears open to those opportunities. And I want to be able to look back and say that maybe I didn't do it perfectly,
Right.
but I did do what God asked me to do.
There are two things in here that you really talked about, and I want to dive into both of them, but I want to start off with this one. When I work with women in business, mothers who are in business, and they're worried about stepping into something, I remind them, you are the daughter of the God who parted the Red Sea. If this is where God wants you to go, you need to assume the Red Sea is going to part for you.
Yes, assume, but also know
Hmm.
that the Red Sea is going to part for you.
I don't know how.
Don't know.
That's not my
We don't
job.
know what that looks like.
Hmm. But that's what he does. That if this is his plan, he'll make a way. Now, the other thing you mentioned is something that's kind of it's going to be fighting words for some people. I've had debates with this with my grandparents who are now passed and my husband's grandparents who are passed. I'm retired. And I asked them, I said, how can you retire from serving God? I'm retired. It's not my job. It's now your job to carry this.
I'm retired from education. I'm not retired from walking what God has put in front of me to walk.
I don't teach Bible classes. I don't have people over. I don't lead prayer. I don't do anything because it's not my job anymore. I've already served. What do you have to say to those people? Because I wanted to give him a swift kick.
I really think that and you saying that, it's like you said, your grandparents. So my parents would be in their late 90s, early 100s, and I never heard that from my mom because once my dad retired from Delta Airlines, they started flying to different countries to visit missionaries, and they became lay missionaries.
Ooh, that's
Up
great.
up until and I'm talking about, of course, my mom loved China because of Mrs. Daniels. My mom had been 9 times, and I've got a quick little story about my mom packing to go on when you went to China
Mhm.
as a missionary, you went with a job. And so she was, going over there to visit a professor at a college, she and my dad, and she had decided she was gonna take Bibles with her. So my brother, a preacher, was like, "Mom, you're going into a communist country. You can't take Bibles with you." And she was like, "I am because I'm packing them in my underwear, and no respectable Chinese man is gonna rifle through my panties and bras."
Did they?
Nope. And so she got Bibles like she was determined to get into China. But what I would say to those people, yes, you've retired, but what if after the 7th day that God took rest, what if he stopped and retired?
Like I told you, I didn't handle it well. And I spoke to my grandfather about this and I said, if you stop serving God, you're just waiting to be buried. He didn't take it too well.
Doubt if he did.
But
But
he's also the same man that says, nobody will care if I'm dead. I'll just be gone. And I said, well, hurry up and die so I can get my millions. He goes, I don't have millions. I said, I know. So we had that whole sarcasm thing going between us. There is a problem in society of thinking that their value is lost because they no longer work in the workforce, or an older person who is retired has no value. And I want to bang my head against the wall. And it's the wall of both sides. It's the
yes,
wall of the elderly
yes,
people and it's the wall of the younger people. And I
yes.
get the perspective from where each is coming from, but as someone who's in the middle,
Yeah.
there is value of the wisdom of the older people. And then there's value in the tenacity and the speed of the younger people. And if they came together, we could get more done. But instead they butt heads. And what happens is the elderly people just step off like, well, it's my time is over. And then the others plow through. And they make mistakes and they learn. But some of those mistakes they could have avoided if they would have just listened.
Right. And I have two older brothers. One lived on the East Coast, one lived on the West Coast, and I stayed near my parents.
Mhm.
And that I believe that that was the best thing for my children because my mom was such a blessing to my kids,
Mhm.
and she was a fabulous cook, and she loved the Lord with all her heart, and that as a matter of fact, my daughter and I were talking last night, and she seems to remember all the uncomfortable things that she went through as a child, and I said, "Could you please think of one good memory that involved me, and it wasn't, making you wear dresses all the time?" And she was like, "Well," and then she'd go, "No, that was grandma." And well, no, that was grandma. But my kids
Mhm.
absorbed that wisdom in Christ from my mother. And my mother having Miss Daniel as a mentor, because Miss Daniel, she was, like I said, up until her early 100s, she was sending out tracts and New Testaments and licking those. Well, she was amazed when she no longer had to lick stamps and they just stuck on there. She couldn't believe that. But I think that just look at people who are still serving
Mhm.
that are in that older age bracket. I think that is just something that is in them. A lot of people don't understand the gifts that we are given by the Lord.
Right.
My mom's gift was of hospitality and of service, and she took that very seriously. And even into her 80s, before she passed away, she was still cooking. And my dad, as a deacon in his 80s, he had a widow group that he had 8 widows that he and my mom would make sure they had food. He would go over and change light bulbs and do whatever. And so that you can minister and be of
Mhm.
service and still keep going.
Right. What would you say to the people who are retired as someone who has retired and now you're stepping into your second act?
You need to be open to listening and believing that there is more out there. Retirement doesn't mean you're finished. Retirement means that, okay, I've done my job, whatever that was, and now I'm ready to do my passion because our job sometimes isn't what we're passionate about. And so just because you're retired doesn't mean it's over with.
Mhm. You're not dead yet.
You're not dead yet. And you just need to be willing to be obedient
Mhm.
to what God has for you in your next chapter.
Yes.
And that's not going to look the same for what I'm doing or for what somebody else is doing, but it's going to be what sustains you and keeps you going.
It seems like when retirement hits, people lose a passion for life. And with that passion for life comes their passion for God, and that's difficult.
Yes.
We've
Yes.
talked about a lot of things. Is there
Yes.
anything you wish I would have asked you that you believe the listeners need to know?
Two things. How did I have my transformation after those 7.5 years? And I don't want to say, oh, you got to read my book. I will tell you.
Okay.
After 7.5 years, I was talking to my brother, and I was really down because let me tell you, the hate, the anger, the bitterness towards that other family, it was not godly.
Right.
And at one of my lowest points, he and I were having a discussion, and he said, sis, your battle isn't with the humans. Your battle all along has been with Satan.
Yeah.
And when he said that, a light bulb went off because remember, I was that surface Christian.
Right.
I wasn't that Christian that had on the armor of Christ, who I was prepared for battle. I was dressed for church, but I wasn't dressed for battle. And once he told me to look at Ephesians and really look at that, it made all the difference in the world. And the one thing, I don't know about you, but I had seen a couple of things on the news where after something horrific had happened to someone at the hands of somebody else, a person was able to forgive them. Now, if you'd have asked me 10 years ago in 2015 if I'd have been able to forgive this family, I'd have told you absolutely not. But scripture tells us that we need to forgive others just like God forgives us, sending his
Right.
son to die on the cross. And so when my brother said that and knowing that the real enemy was Satan, it really spoke to me. And at that point, I started just talking to God, praying to God. And one night in my office, while I was praying and talking to him, the Spirit of the Lord just filled me. And I dropped to my knees and said, Lord, I forgive them. I truly, truly forgive them. Because Satan had been telling me, if you forgive them, they win. But God had spoken to me and said, but if you don't, you lose.
Oh, yeah.
And the gentleman that was helping me write my book, he said, how do you know that you forgave them? I said, because I'm at peace and I can talk about the situation. I can recall wonderful times with my granddaughter without having that bitterness and hate and anger that consumed me.
Yeah.
I don't have that anymore. And so that's what I would say to anyone that is going through that season of life that maybe God is putting someone or a circumstance on your heart that it's scary. But when you've got God by your side and you want that healing, you've got to take that first step.
Healing is a lot of work.
Yes. It doesn't happen overnight because what the situation is, what the rejection is, what the hurt, anger
Right.
is, it didn't happen overnight.
Right. One of the first things I talked about with my therapist was, do you consider this a place to relax? I said, no.
No.
So, well, we want you to feel at ease. I said, I'm here to work. I've got a lot I've got to work through. I am here to work. This is not relaxing because I'm the type that when therapy is over, I take a nap because I'm done emotionally. So,
Well, and the difference is, yes, you have a thank you. You've got a relaxing environment,
mm,
but digging down deep within me, I'm not going to be relaxed.
oh, yeah.
And like you said, what was the biggest thing that God showed me? Discomfort.
I think we have created this myth as Christians around healing that we think you just pray about it once and it's gone. You just give it to God and it never comes back. You ask for forgiveness and it goes away. But it doesn't. If you have never been to an ER where they've cleaned a wound, you don't understand what you're coming in for.
Right.
And funny story, my husband cut onto his finger pretty deep. And we're on the way to the hospital and he goes, I won't need anesthesia. It'll be fine. So we get there and I told the nurse, he doesn't need anesthesia. And the guy's like, what? Sir, do you want anesthesia? And he says, no, I don't need it. I'll be fine. Sir, you need this. And I'm sitting there, I'm laughing because I know. Now I know the needle is going to hurt. The anesthesia is going to hurt, but it's nothing compared to cleaning out the wound. The problem is that we think that we should have numbing agent to numb us from the pain of healing. There isn't anything. There's nothing. And you're going to have to walk through it.
Absolutely.
So before we go, I asked the people I've interviewed and people who listen have asked them for a question. And so the question I have for you is, how has courageous obedience changed your relationship with God?
How it has changed me is, well, I get in my car and I live out in the rural area. So if I go to Sam's or wherever, I drive an hour and I can look down at my speedometer and I'm going 90 something because I have worship in my car on the
Yeah.
daily. I listen to Christian music.
Mhm.
I surround myself with positivity, with scripture.
Mhm.
And until I started that transformation, and quite honestly, I was raised in the church and everything, but when my husband and I moved out here, we did not find a church family.
Okay.
Driving, and this was after my brother and I had talked, and my husband, the VA gave me 44 hours of caregiving. And so I had someone who would come in and help with him. So one day I was driving and I was like, Lord, I can't do this anymore alone.
Yep.
I have to surround myself with Christian family, a community. And so I visited a couple of churches, and my husband's caregiver, he wanted to join the church when I did. So she was able to help him go with me to church and everything. And so it has changed just the way I'm joyful now. And had I not gone through what I did, I don't know how I would have handled being my husband's caregiver and how I could have been prepared for his passing. That had I not gone through all that, I don't know how I would have been able to handle 3 years of being my husband's caregiver and going through his passing. And so I just have joy in my heart, a renewed relationship with God,
Mhm.
and I have the armor of Christ on, and I don't listen to the father of lies.
That is the way to do it. Tell everybody how they can find you and your book.
Well, thank you. I have my website is Lesley Carney Speaks.com, and it's my speaker website. But if you do /start, there is a downloadable 5-page freebie that if you want to take that first step towards healing, you can get my guide. And then
Right.
my book is on Amazon, From Bitter to Bless. And it also has a companion guide that goes with it. If you want to walk your journey and go through
Mhm.
scriptures, it has a companion guide as well.
Thank you for coming on today, Lesley. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Samantha. I appreciate it as well.
Thank you so much for being here and spending this time with me. If this episode encouraged you, gave you clarity, or helped you think differently about your purpose and what God is calling you to do, I would love for you to follow the podcast, share it with someone who might need it too. Because the more we talk about faith, obedience, and living in God's purpose, the more we begin to recognize how God is working in our everyday lives too. And if you're in a place right now where you're asking, what is God calling me to do? How do I find my purpose? How do I hear God's voice more clearly? I've created something for you. It's a free guided resource called Living Out God's Purpose, 21-day journal and prayer prompts. It's about helping you slow down, quiet the noise, and begin to realign your life with what God is already speaking. You can download it for free using the link in the show notes. And just remember this as you go, you don't have to do everything. You just have to be faithful in what God has given you. That is what John 17:4 means. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next episode.